All right, we're nearly there at the end of this section, but there's one more important JavaScript concept I want to get across before we go and make our reaction tester. And that is functions. So we've already kind of looked at functions already. So we've created a function which is just a chunk of code that happens at a certain time. And we've made this code to happen when that button is clicked. But we can also create our own functions that do whatever we want. So I'm going to get rid of the text that's there for the moment. And this, but we will come back to this because we're going to be remaking this with functions at the end of this video. But for now, let's just see how we define a very basic function. So to define a function, we use the keyword function, and then we call the function whatever we want. So I'm going to make a very basic function that just sends an alert. So I'm going to call it alert me. And then we use parentheses as part of our function definition. This one, I'm not going to send any information to it. I'm just going to call it. So we've just got empty parentheses as we've seen before. And all this function is going to do is alert, hi there Rob, and that's it. So at the moment, that won't do anything because all I've done is defined the function. I haven't actually done this request yet. So if I wanted to do it, all I would do is use the command alert me to run the function alert me. So that will now alert, hi there Rob. So you might ask, why would we bother doing this? It's a little bit of a complicated way of just doing that. Well, the main thing is what you'll probably find when you're writing bigger, more complicated websites is that there are certain things that you want to do again and again. And what is generally a really bad idea is writing code and then copying and pasting that code into different portions of your JavaScript. Much better is to collect that code together into a function and then just call that function whenever you want to do that thing. So if you are making a game, for example, you might have a function that moves the main character. And then when a key is pressed, then it calls that function and moves them in a certain direction. Or you might have a function get tweets, which gets the latest tweets for a particular user, and then the program can display them wherever you want them. So they're essentially a way of keeping your code better organized, more easily updatable, and easier to read. As a general rule, if you find yourself writing the same command twice, it's probably better to put it in a function. So functions can obviously do a lot more than just alert things. And as we've seen, they can receive values as well. So let's see how we receive those values. Let's say, for example, I'm writing a website which requires me to average numbers a lot. So take two numbers and find the average of them. So if I wanted to find the average of x and y, let's say I've got an x which is 5 and a y which is 10. Obviously I could do x plus y and then put that in brackets and divide it by 2. That would give me the average of those two. But if I was doing that again and again and again, I'd probably want to store that code somewhere else so I didn't have it in lots of different places in my app. So how could we do that with a function? Well, let's change this function to be called average. And this function is now going to need two numbers because it can't tell you the average of the numbers unless you tell the function what the numbers are. So within our function, let's call these numbers a and b. And that means that whenever we call this function average now, we're going to need to pass two numbers to it. So then our function is going to take the two numbers, add them together, and divide them by 2, just like we said here. And what we're going to want is the result to be given back once the function is complete. And we do that using the keyword return. And then we put whatever value we want to return in brackets, like that. So what this will now do is allow us to call the function average with two numbers, and then it will return the value of those two numbers added together and divided by 2. So let's see it in action. let's alert the average of X and Y. Let's have a look. The answer is 7.5. So this is calling the function average with the two numbers X and Y, and then the code will jump over here to average, and then it will do the calculation, add them together and divide by 2, and then it will return that here. So essentially it replaces this with the number that it finds when it adds them together and divides them by 2. So again, a fairly trivial example, but you can imagine some code where you're averaging a lot. It's a lot simpler to have your average function outside and then just look at this and you'll say, oh, what I'm doing there is finding the average of the two of them. So that's how we use functions to receive and return values of things. Let's jump back using Command Z to our number guessing game and see how we can redefine this in terms of functions. Now this code is not particularly complicated. We can follow it through and just about see what's going on, but it might make more sense to extract the guessing part of it as a function. So let's see how that might look. So at the beginning of my code, I'm going to define function, and I'll call it do a guess. And the only information the function needs is the correct answer. So we'll call that correct answer. And that's what we'll refer to it as in the function. So the bit that we want to extract then is this bit here. So I'm just going to copy all of that and I'll make some changes while we're in. So we're going to create our guess variable and we're going to multiply it by 6 and use floor to make it a whole number. And what we're going to do is check to see if guess is equal to not my number this time, but correct answer, because that's what we're calling it within this function. And what we're going to do is, if we've got it right, then we'll return true, which is, remember, a Boolean. And if we've got it wrong, we'll return false. So what we're essentially doing is siloing a certain chunk of code or piece of logic into its own section of our code. Doesn't change a great deal, and in this case it does make it a lot more efficient, but hopefully you can see that it makes a bit more sense to have this separate. So now I no longer need this chunk of code because the guess is all happening inside the function up here. So instead of checking whether guess is equal to my number, I'm going to check whether do a guess is equal to true, not false. And remember, I need to send the correct answer to do a guess, and the correct answer is my number here. So the logic is still the same, but the structure of the code is now a bit different, and the do a guess section of the code is taken out of the main body. So whether you think that's better than it was before is a matter of opinion, but definitely when your code gets more complicated, you'll find that taking chunks out into functions just makes it so much easier to manage. One more quick change before we run it is this variable guess is now only defined inside this function. And this is something called scope, which we'll look at in much greater detail as we go on in the course. But essentially, if a variable is defined inside a function, it will only be available inside that function. So we can't use the variable guess down here, but that's not a problem because we have the correct answer in another variable, my number. So let's just use my number instead. All right, let's just have a look and make sure that things work. Yep, 2 guesses, looks good. 5, 8 guesses, looks like it's doing the right thing. So it's the same code, just restructured in the form of a function. So congratulations, you've made it to the end of the main part of the JavaScript section of the course, but we still have our exciting reaction tester where we're going to put all of this together coming up next.